Hello everyone, this time we are going to look at the visual editor and how to position visual components on the screen, right? How we are not going to look at all the detailed properties of each possible visual component that you can find here in the marketplace, right? So here you have all of them. And we are simply looking at how to use the properties palette and the layers tab here docked on the left in order to position things on your screen. So let's start. I could use any object. I'm going to start with a text field. Here, as soon as we drop it, we see that we have the instantaneous visual feedback on the live application that is running here in a mobile phone. I also have a live instance running here in a different tab in my browser. So first things first, when we look at the properties palette, we see that here we have a tooltip. The first tab is about specific properties to each object. So here I have a text field. The text field has a label, which I could name it latitude, just to have a visual feedback about what it is in my live application. And again, as I type, you see that the visual feedback is happening instantaneously. If I switch to this tab, I also have it here. Great. I have some other properties which are specific to that text field. And if I chose anything else, you would see that I have specific properties for each object. You can try them all and you'll see. But the goal today is really about the other ones, about the positioning. Okay, so now it's positioned. And you see I can position it, let's say here, right here. Great, it could happen. You know, here it's resized, but let's say I have a wider screen, or I resize my, marketplace so that I can work on it. Great. But the visual feedback tells me that it's not working on a mobile phone, while on a web page it's working fine. So when you compose an application, you have to think about all the screen sizes that anyone's going to use in a target environment. So here on my screen, you see I cannot scroll, I cannot even access this. I would have to resize my browser here, the window, which I'm not going to do. Here you have properties on the screen itself. And same thing, it's specific properties for screen. So horizontal scrolling and vertical scrolling and show the scroll bars are not properties I would see on the text field, but I see them on the screen. So I can turn them on, and here, if I scroll, I can scroll left and right, and the same would go for the vertical scrolling. So that's a good reflex to have if you have such screen, to not forget about those which are off by default. Okay, great, but that doesn't help me with the target app. So here I can select it, and here in my second tab I have the position and sizes. On the third tab I have visual properties, which are common to all visual components, right? Here I have X, Y, Z is the Z index in case of overlap. Tab index works by default normally depending on the order of how you position your objects, but here you can override the tab index, and the width and height here can be defined manually too. Here you'd have the visual properties, where you can define colors and the border of a visual component. Is it hidden? Is it not? And here on the last one, you have the interactions or events that can be overridden or handled for a given component. So here I could monitor the on change when the user types in, or the click. When you click, you monitor this event. So let's go back to my positioning. Here you can enter values, and you see that if I move them, the values change, and if I change that here, I can put like 200, great, and here you see the feedback here. But you can also have access to a drop down. You have a spinner control also, just to increment slightly. And you have a drop down, and here on the drop down you have the manual mode, which is the default one I just used. You can align left, great. You can align not. You can align right and right. You see here it's working on any screen. So great, I could align right. Top. So, but, okay, let's say for the purpose of this demo, I'm gonna center it. And center works fine, again, on all devices, on all screen sizes. Cool. And you see that as soon as X is defined as a center positioning, I can move manually my visual component. It's going to move up and down, but never left and right because it's locked in the X direction. Cool. So here I can adjust that. Great. Okay, now let's add another one. I'm going to add another one, which I'm going to name longitude. It's not going to be a functional application, right? It's just for visual purposes and positioning that I'm showing this. So we make a clear difference between those two on the screen. Okay, great. Now, same thing. You know, I can move left and right and all, or adjust. But, you know, what if I want to position them properly? You know, really have great alignment. Here, the screen has a property named layout. And layout is absolute. So absolute by default means I can position things on my own or define, you know, restrictions like I just did for this one. But I can also define something else, which is a vertical positioning. So here, any control I'm going to add, so I can add also a button here, and I can name it get position. You know, it's going to be aligned vertically. And here there is the horizontal alignment, which is by default center, which could be left. So it's still a vertical layout, but a line on the left or a line on the right. And here I have this one. So let's go back to center. I have this one. So the vertical alignment is manual, or it could be distributed. And in that case, the sizes will be computed so that it's equally shared across the screen. Okay. Okay, let's go back to that. I can add some spacing. Let's say 10, and great. Now I can go back to this one, and we see that the sizes are not all the same. Well, it's because each width is manual. Here we see that, right? The width is entirely free. As we see in the drop down, we have the ability to define the value, to define a percentage. So here I could define a percentage for the latitude, and by default here, as soon as I click it, it chooses 100%, so it's 100% of my screen size. I could decide to go to 80%. Now this one, same thing. The width is completely free. So again, I could decide to go to 80%. And here, boom, they are aligned. Okay, you know, if I had like, you know, and let's say this one, same thing, I want to define 80%. Okay, so now let's get back to, you see that I need to do some action for each control to position them properly. Okay, I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to cancel that with 2. And another way to position them in such a way that, okay, so here they are centered. Let's just choose some values which are completely different. I could decide to select and group them. And when I group them, the group itself has also a layout. So the layout can be vertical, same thing, and you see it's been aligned. And it has a spacing. Great. And so then I can go to each visual component in the layer. So now we take a look at the layers, and here we see that I didn't name them properly. So I'm going to name that latitude. These are not the names in the UI, these are the names for the implementation, right? The names of the object inside the code, right? It's for the developer's names, and here I'm going to name that button get position. So when I implement some logic, we'll see that later, we have the proper names. Okay, so I'm going to the latitude, and here I'm going to define not the x, but the width is going to be 100%. 100% of the width of its parent. So before the parent was the screen, now it's the group. And the same for the longitude, I'm going to define 100% of the screen. So that means that when I resize my group, everything follows in sequence inside the group. Great. We see that, and same thing here. So here we see a difference of sizes, and why is that? Well, simply because, again, a group itself could have a percentage of the screen size, which could be, in this case, 80%. And here we have 80%, and normally here we have 80%. Great. So that's one way to help position things properly aligned or not aligned. Okay, and so another thing is, since we have a vertical layout here, everything is aligned vertically. When there is a layout defined, the way to reorder objects is done in the layers. So here, if I want to move my button above the other group, I'm going to move it through the layers list. Right? So the orders of the layers are going to be the order on the screen. Here, same thing. I can move my group above. And I could do the same inside the group because the group has a layout. So I can move the latitude and longitude and inverse them that way. Great. So I'm back on my screen. I have a vertical layout. I could have a horizontal layout. Great. And here you see, and the same thing goes. The button could be set above. So it's a horizontal layout with a spacing that can be defined. Okay, looks ugly on purpose. So that's why I'm going to go back to a vertical layout alignment. And this spacing and this group's going to be back that way. Great. Okay, so that's one way, using groups to align things. And you can put groups inside groups, and you know, the control here is not the control, but the visual components, latitude and longitude, you know, occupy 100% of the width of the group, but you know, it could be also 90%. And that way you could define a margin around visual components inside a group. So you can use groups not just to group things, but also to help positioning things with a proper margin. Okay, and the group can be also ungrouped at any time. Okay, boom. Okay, so that's one way of doing things. Now, another way. I'm going to cancel everything. You know, everything that is locked. Okay, I need first to go to an absolute layout. Here, make sure that X, Y, and Z and everything is cancelled, which is the case. And so here that means, again, I can move things the way I want. So now let's look at something else. If I look at the properties, here we had that drop down, so I'm going to collapse the layers in this case, and we see that X can be centered left and right, we saw that, and here there is an fx, a function. So for each single property in the visual editor, we can have a function. Here the function is a function. You know, it opens a function editor. And here for the longitude, I could define a property that is relative to another object. So here I'm going to drop the latitude and get its x value and set it to the longitude. And here we see on the right, we have our own. Here we fix it. So that means that if I go back to my screen, each time I'm going to move, my latitude and longitude is going to move in X, not in Y. Okay. If I want to also lock the vertical, another option could be to also implement the Y. Again, I'm going to have a function editor. I can draw up the latitude. Here I'm going to be interested in the Y, get value. I'm going to be interested in its height, get value. I need to add them together. So here let's resize that. So we have more real estate. And I'm going to add them together. I'm going to add a +3 so that I add the Y value of latitude here and a spacing of 10. And here I return that. And once it's connected, you see that it's properly aligned. If I go back to my home screen and I move anywhere, the longitude is going to follow. And the same thing goes for this live instance in my web browser. Okay, now if I resize this and I want to have the longitude follow, well, you guessed it, I can also implement the width as a function so that it's the same as the width of my latitude, and I just connect them. And if I go back to my screen, here, same thing. Anything I do is going to be followed by the other control, the other visual component. Okay, so that's another way to do things. And as we see, any given property in any of the tabs can be defined dynamically. So you can have properties which evolve dynamically. So now if we look at all the tabs, you know, here we see that we have specific values. Here we saw the positioning can be defined dynamically. Well, you could define a color dynamically. You could define the radius. So here, let's say for the button, I can change the radius of that button and make it look that way. Increase it. So here again, I have a function for that. And here, an interesting property is the CSS property. So not everything is exposed in the property palette. For the properties which are not exposed, you could define them as a CSS. And for each property, you see that if you overlay, there's a small I for information. So here you have an example. So you could define the font size. The font size is not exposed, but you can define it here. The background is exposed, but you could also define it here or inside the property. You choose. And there's also another syntax, which similar to the CSS, it's the MUI. And here we have it. You have, because it's trickier than the pure CSS, you have the syntax for MUI properties. And in case you want further information, here there's a link, and it loads the help for MUI properties. And you have tons of examples. That's not an Olympe page, right? It's a public link available to anyone doing web development. Okay. So think about those things, think about looking at the help in case you're stuck or in case it's not clear. And now I'm going to look at how to define an event. So for instance, this get position, I want to handle the event and I'm going to implement it that way. And here we have an action. An action is different from a function because it's triggered at a specific moment in time. And action and events and triggered by user interaction with a visual component are a perfect example. So here I can do something dummy just to show my point about dynamic properties and events. So I can choose, let's say, latitude, get its position, and I want to change it dynamically. So I'm gonna have my plus brick here, and I'm going to add 10. So each time I press my get position, I want to move, I want to move the latitude object by on X and add 10. Okay, so now I added 10. Now I need to set it back. So I want to set the value this time, and this time it's an action because I want to decide to change at a specific time when I press the button. So here I can look at this instance, and each time I press, and because longitude follows, because of the reasons we implemented, because of the logic we implemented, we see that here you move the controls. And that works in that instance and not in this one, which is normal, because it's only the values of a given instance that are modified with this logic. Okay, and last thing I want to show you is that some bricks, and this is valid not just in the visual editor, it's valid throughout the Olympe drawer. It's not explained in the UI tool, so I'm going to show it now because it works here and it works everywhere. Some bricks are black and some are not. Why is that? Here, if we look at the dependencies by default are primordial and core. So any projects you create will have those. Those dependencies will bring bricks with them that are in black. So any black brick means it comes from the existing dependencies. So if I go back to my visual editor and I look for a button, it means it comes from one of those two dependencies. But if I look for a map, for instance, and I want to display a map on my screen. So first, before I drop it, it's gray, right? I have its help, it explains me what to do. We see that it's an integration of an existing Mapbox object. Great, I want to try it. I'm going to drag and drop it. And here, before it's dropped, it tells me, look, this brick comes from a different project. And if you want to use it, we are going to create a dependency on that project. Yes or no? Yes, sure. Great. And once the object is dropped and the dependency is created, the brick becomes black. It's not a gray brick anymore. And why is that? Because if I look at my dependencies now, I created a new dependency. That's pretty much all I wanted to show you today about the visual editor. So as I said, visual editor is about screens, but not only, if I created a custom visual component here, it's the same editor. So in this case, the visual component itself has the default properties with layouts. So it's the same as a screen and appears here in yellow. So yeah, play with it, play with the various visual components available to you, those that are not in the default projects. And if you feel stuck, never forget that there is the Learn the Basics section here to help you. There is always the help, and never forget, join us on Discord and ask questions. Ask away if you're stuck, if you don't manage to find the solution, and if something is not clear, the team will be glad to help you out. Have a nice day.